This video provides an introduction to scatterplots. Scatterplots are something that we use when we have sampling data about the relationship between two variables. We use scatterplots to plot the data on a graph so we can see if there is any association. In short, we're going to get real-world data, and scatterplots are a way to show that on a graph. When we see this word association, which means the same thing as correlation, they're talking about, do we see any patterns shown in the relationship or on the scatter plot that would help us predict future outcomes or understand what's happening in the relationship? For this video, we're not going to look at any real-world problems yet. We're just going to talk about when we see scatter plots that look like some of these scatter plots, how we can classify or categorize them. The first scatter plot we see here, with X being shown here and Y shown there, we would say that scatter plot has a positive correlation or a positive association. That's because in general, the larger we get for X, we see that the data points tend to have a larger Y value as well. The biggest Y values up here all have X values that are pretty large, and the smallest Y values down here all have small X values as well. If we see the opposite kind of relationship, the bigger X gets, the smaller Y actually gets, we would say that has a negative association or a negative correlation. If we know that X is a large value, then we have a pretty good idea that Y will be some kind of smaller value. This third scatter plot is what we would call no correlation. There doesn't seem to be any relationship or pattern between X and Y at all. If I know that X is a small value, I have no idea if the Y will be one of these small outputs or one of these really large outputs. Same thing's true if X is a large value. We don't know if it'll be a small Y value or a really large Y value. Some of the more complicated relationships in the real world won't have a constant linear relationship like these first two positive and negative associations. We could actually call this a linear positive association and a linear negative association. Sometimes the scatter plot will show you that it's linear for a while, and then it starts curving or changing the straight line direction it was going, and we could call those nonlinear scatter plots or nonlinear correlations. It doesn't follow the straight line pattern, but there is some kind of predictive capability. We know if X is really small, so should Y. We know if X is really big, Y should be really small. And we know if X is somewhere in the middle, that's when we should get large Y values. So there is some pattern or correlation here that we can talk about. Lastly, we want to talk about a couple other ideas. A strong correlation versus a weak correlation. Strong correlation means that if we drew a straight line, what we're going to call a line of best fit, it would fit the data pretty well. Here we see there is some pattern, some relationship, but if we drew a straight line, a line of best fit, it wouldn't be as tight, it wouldn't be as close to hitting all of the data points as the relationship we see over here. The last term we should explain if we were asked about what an outlier is. When we're talking about data or scatter plots, an outlier is one data point that doesn't really fit the pattern that every other data point shows. Here we see this strong negative relationship, whereas X is small, Y tends to be a big number, 5 or 6, and as X gets larger towards 5 or 6, Y's output tends to be small. But we see this one data point when X was small, a value of about 1, the Y was still not even a value of 2. This is an outlier, it doesn't fit the rest of the data.